Hi, this is Susan Evans from susanevans.org, and today I have the privilege of introducing my husband, Alan Evans. He is here with us, and today's session is called Don't Let Homeschooling Ruin Your Marriage. Am I live? Can someone tell me if I'm live? Okay. Today I would like to talk about what it's like to be a homeschool mom, to the joy of teaching your own children, and the planning that goes into the curriculum, the excitement of knowing that you're in the will of God, and you just feel so much joy about homeschooling. And that is not wrong. It's not sin to enjoy and love homeschooling. I know that some days aren't great, the kids are complaining or whatever, but in general, homeschooling gives most homeschool moms a lot of joy. And so, because of that, we tend to obsess about homeschooling because that's what we do with all of our time during the day. We homeschool our kids, so that is like our occupation. And so we feel overjoyed, we love it, we're reading about it and everything. And then suddenly our marriages tend to go on the back burner without even thinking. Like we don't even think about that. So what I would like to ask my husband today is when we as homeschool moms put all of our obsession and energy and joy, and when homeschooling is what brings us the most joy in life and not necessarily you, how does that feel for the man, or how does that happen?
Well, clearly, I should bring you the most joy in life, shouldn't I? Well, I think that any time that somebody who is married finds something in their life, outside of God Himself, but finds something in his life that they enjoy much more than their spouse, that's a problem. And so, if you're in that situation and you're married to someone and you would rather go do something else, go teach your kids homeschooling or go work on the car or go to the mall, if you would rather do that than be married, that's a problem.
Than be with your spouse.
Right.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I also know of quite a few marriages that homeschooling has actually broken up their marriage, because homeschooling puts a lot of pressure on a marriage because we are with our children 24/7. We don't have a break from them really. And so there's that strain. And so I would like to go to that whole first love idea that we talked about when we were preparing for this, is that without noticing, of course I love you more than I love homeschooling, but there have been times even in my own homeschooling where I just got so obsessed with it, I tired myself out, I was exhausted from homeschooling, and then I didn't have any energy for you. And so can you address that, the first love thing? You basically hinted at it just now. So.
Well, okay. First, you just have to prioritize your relationships. Understand that in this world, your relationship with your spouse is a permanent relationship. We hope. You're married, and you're supposed to be married until the day you die. Your children, you hope they don't live in your house until the day you die. So, I guess the goal is that the children should grow up and then they should leave. If that's the case, then that means that your relationship with your children is a temporary relationship as opposed to the permanent relationship. So if you're prioritizing the temporary relationships over the permanent one, you're probably sacrificing the permanent one on the altar of the temporary ones. So, that's just something to keep in mind. Obviously homeschooling is vitally important. We homeschool for a reason. But there's going to come a day when you're not going to be homeschooling anymore. And, and when that day comes, you hope that there's something left of your marriage, to last you for the rest of your life, because that's what you have.
Right. I know one of the questions that people would have in coming to a session like this, and in lots of homeschooling families, the husband is opposed to homeschooling. They do not want their wife to homeschool, but they're allowing it, but they're really kind of grumbling underneath. What would you counsel the homeschool mom who has an unsupportive husband towards homeschooling?
Well, okay. Now I'm going to make a lot of enemies here, but if your husband is opposed to homeschooling, then the first answer is no more homeschooling. That like I said, you're married to your husband. The Bible counsels us that we're to live with our spouses even if they're tyrannical.
Directly opposed to the word.
Right. So you have to live inside that framework. Obviously we consider homeschooling a good thing. And I know that plenty of couples are split on this. The mom is enthusiastically homeschooling because she sees all the benefits, or she sees that she wants to spend time with her children and raise them up. But the man, what he sees is all of the inconvenience, right? To the woman there's inconvenience, but that inconvenience doesn't matter. To the man, he sees the inconvenience. He comes home tired from work, and his wife wants to talk to him about homeschooling for the next 4 hours, and he doesn't even really want to homeschool. So what do you think that's driving him to? Right? That's just that's making him more sternly against it, because that's what he has to live with, and he doesn't really want to live with it.
Right.
And like I said, we consider homeschooling to be a good thing. I hope in the crowd of people who are watching this, I hope that homeschooling is something that you're not opposed to. But if you're dealing with a spouse who is, then you kind of have to tread lightly. You really have to. You have to, one, for the wife, she has to submit to her husband, regardless. If he says no more homeschooling, the answer has to be okay.
What's more important to you, your marriage or homeschooling? If you have to choose between homeschooling and your marriage, if you don't choose your marriage, you're in trouble. That's what you said to me the other night when we were talking about this.
Well, yeah, and you're in trouble, for the rest of your life. Marriages end over things like this. Even marriages between, believers end over, over petty disagreements that just go on for years and years and years and become annoying and, drag out. And men in particular, if their wife is off on some project, they want to be unbothered by it. And that's, okay, from the standpoint of the man, that's not right. Okay, men and women should be on the same page. They should be really working together to raise their children. And if they're not, then there's a problem. But since I understand that the lion's share of the audience here is the women, I imagine that I'm going to have to talk about what the women can do to really stitch it up and repair it and make it better. But even if the man has faults, even if the man is sinning by not supporting, what's going on in the home, the wife is going to have to find some way to make it work, some way to try to instill some enthusiasm in her husband.
Right. Some of the things we mentioned when we talked about this was, if it was me, then I would try to use my feminine wiles to get my husband to be on board in homeschooling, and then I would prove to him that I was good at it, because I would feel, if he didn't want me to homeschool, I would feel like he didn't trust me to homeschool our kids. And so to me, that would be a deeper issue. Now, you also mentioned, though, several things that a woman can do to help her husband get on board for homeschooling. So, step one, if your husband despises homeschooling and your marriage is on the rocks, I personally would stop homeschooling. And if you know me at all, I love homeschooling. It is a part of my soul. So for me to say that is huge. I would immediately stop homeschooling. I would get on my knees before God, and I would pray. I would pray that that my husband would be called by God to do it and feel that he's called by God to do it. And then the other thing that you mentioned was that you could give him documentation to prove that documentation that could prove that homeschooling has people score higher even when the parents don't have a college degree or whatever. So there's actual documentation for that. And then you also said, like, maybe have people over to eat.
Well, that's here. The first thing is, with regard to that, I mean, with regard to documentation, I mean, people are going to believe what they want to believe. Documentation is only going to be helpful in the case where the man is genuinely turned off by homeschooling because he thinks it's bad. That's pretty rare. Most men who don't want their wives to homeschool don't want it for other reasons. They see that their kids are social misfits and don't know how to act around other kids. Of course, they don't spend 8 hours a day with other kids. You know, they come home and and their wife talks about homeschooling constantly, and they don't want. I mean, I'm a supporter of homeschooling, and I know that for me, when I come home from work, sometimes I just want to sit and be pleasant. And that's probably wrong on my part, but of course my wife has been homeschooling all day and she wants to talk my ear off about all the great things that have happened. And by the time most men come home from a full day's work, they're done for the day, and they don't want that. So I say documentation is good, but only in the case where the husband is genuinely convinced that there's something wrong statistically with homeschooling, which is really the rare case. The much more common case is that the husband either sees some of the downsides, and there are downsides. I'm not a subscriber that socialization is like a really important thing, but I do know that a lot of homeschool kids do not socialize well with non-homeschooled kids. And maybe that doesn't mean anything, it doesn't make a lot of difference to you, but that can make a lot of difference to a husband who is not real enthusiastic about homeschooling. That's one strike against, right? That's right. Like, hey, there's a point I can make, because people are going to convince themselves of whatever they want to convince themselves of. So in the more common case, I think, of the dad who's just really unenthusiastic about it and thinks that it's like, some silly thing, I think that, you have to find some other way. And I know we talked earlier about maybe inviting over another homeschooled family, which does two things. One, they probably have a lot of kids, so they're going to take your kids off and be occupied with them. And secondly, if the dad in that family has got his head screwed on straight about homeschooling, he's probably going to talk to your husband about homeschooling, and that may be way more effective than anything you could badger him about.
Right, because the man will be honest about the bad things about homeschooling, and then the man will believe that other man. That it's not just some womanly thing that they're trying to take over or whatever. You mentioned about talking about stuff besides homeschooling. I know that, like, when we go out on a date night, which I highly recommend spending time alone with your husband, and that can be hard when you're homeschooling. And but basically, when we go out on a date or something like that, a lot of times you don't want to talk about homeschooling. And so I asked you the other night when we were talking about this, before we were married, I was a teacher, and we went out on a date or whatever, and we would talk, and I would talk about my day. My day was being a teacher, and so he enjoyed that, and he was relaxed, and I could bubble over about my day, and he was fine and didn't feel all stressed out or anything. And then but now that we're married, my day somehow is stressful to you.
Well, there's a difference between, back when we were dating, I could separate myself a little bit from what was going on. First off, if we went out, you wouldn't talk the entire time about your day at work. That wasn't the case. But even if you had, I think that at that time I could have separated myself from it some, because hey, we're still separate.
You're not responsible for it.
But now that we're married, you have issues homeschooling. Those are my issues. So if you're going to talk about them, now I have to ratchet up the responsibility and sit there. Okay, well, she's bringing up some problems. Now I have to solve those problems. And that may be a bad attitude on my part, but that's the way I react to it now that we're married, because your problems are my problems now. Right. Whereas when we were dating, your problems were your problems, and I could still walk away.
Right. So So basically, you're saying that problem solving is something that you are required by God to do as being the head of the household. And so when I share with you things about homeschooling or about the kids or whatever, you rightly feel responsible, but then it's exhausting, like you want to take a break from that and just be with me. And so think about that, women, when you're with your men, they just want to be with you. And so don't take it as an insult that they don't want to hear about your day, because they love you, they want to be with you and want to be refreshed by you. And they do want to hear about your kids and everything, just not constantly. There needs to be something in your marriage where you can be talking about other things. Now, one of the things I do is I try to have other interests and other things that I read, or we talk about God, and there is responsibility there too, my husband was saying, but at least it's exciting to be talking about God when Alan is shepherding me spiritually. And I've written a lot of articles about this on my website, susanevans.org. I've also put them on the Homeschool channel about marriage. You can look under that category. But basically, whenever I'm talking about spiritual things, it's more exciting, or even if it's not spiritual per se, but it's like sort of spiritual. Like one time we had a conversation about whether Satan was on the space-time continuum, because if he accuses me before God night and day, how does that look? I mean, how can he, does he do that just about me, or what? So we're talking philosophically about stuff, and it's exciting and interesting. It's not just the kids. And
well, again, if your entire time together as a married couple is all about the kids, okay, that you're going to have some serious empty nest syndrome when those kids aren't there anymore. Because then if you've spent the last 15, 18 years talking about nothing but the kids, and they're not there anymore, what are you going to talk about now? I mean, you're basically strangers about every other thing, right? I know that for me, and this may be not the same for other people, but there's times when I don't feel like talking about the kids. I'd rather sit in silence and do nothing at all, but sit in a silent room with my wife rather than chat about the kids. Because I've already come home. I've had to discipline the kids. I've rolled my eyes at how ridiculous my kids are being. We've whatever's gone on, we finally got them in the bed. And then my wife starts talking about the kids, and I talk about a letdown. I'd rather talk about us. I'd rather talk about I don't know, whatever's
coming up, like in the summer or whatever.
Yeah, but we used to talk about something when we were dating, and it wasn't our kids, was it?
Right.
So,
right. So what other things were you talking about?
Right.
I think it's like I was wanting to get to know you, and so you talked about some things from your past. I think husbands and wives think they know everything about each other, and so they don't talk about that kind of thing. But there's stuff I learn about Alan all the time, like stuff from when he was a child or whatever that he forgot about, and something that I said or something that somebody else said or what he saw triggers some memory from the past or whatever. So, and we're growing and learning. And actually, the woman I am today is different than the woman he married. I mean, in a good way. Tell me it's good.
We hope.
Anyway, so yeah, we continue to grow and learn. I would like to also address finances. I know in homeschool families, because there's usually just one breadwinner, finances can be an issue. And we haven't actually, I talked about this, but I have a whole audio on my website, Don't Fight Over Finances, that is my testimony of how I used to stress out really badly, and then I learned to trust God and just be calm that God would provide our needs. But homeschooling curriculum, especially math and things like that, or consumables, sometimes will put more strain on a marriage. Finances is one of those top 3 things that destroys marriages. It's like communication, intimacy, and finances. And so finances, that's big. So you have anything to say about that?
Well, okay. First off, I mean, if you've got difficulty in finances, this comes right back to the core of your marriage. I mean, are you on the same page about things? I know that back when my wife was stressed about finances, I I probably wasn't handling finances very well, although I considered it my responsibility. Um, you know, but the fact that I was carrying some debt, and and my wife didn't really know what was going on, and it causes a lot of stress, and that gets in the way. And then it comes back to if the man is somewhat opposed to homeschooling to begin with, and then he comes and says, "Wow, the math curriculum costs $275." Well, you keep that in mind. I mean, obviously you've got to you have to get your curriculum, or you have to do something else. But keep in mind, in the cases where your husband doesn't want, is not real enthusiastic about homeschooling, what messages you're sending him. Hey, listen, I want to homeschool, and the curriculum's going to cost us $500 this semester, and he's just like, why are we homeschooling again?
It's like we don't have the money or whatever.
Yeah. So I mean, understand. I mean, I'm not telling you that's a reason not to homeschool. I'm just saying that's something to be sensitive about.
Right.
How is your husband perceiving the way you're allocating resources in the home? I mean, if he's the sole breadwinner, you're allocating his resources. That's the way he sees it.
Right.
So you have to be really, really careful. So maybe you have to be imaginative, and go to some resale shops and make some money on the side in order to help offset this. And again, I'm not saying that's ideal, or that's what's required, but I'm just saying if the man is not enthusiastic about it, you need to be real sensitive about what messages you're sending him. And if there are men here, and there must be men besides Paul.
Maybe.
If there are men listening to this, and you're stressing your wife out about finances, you need to stop. I mean, you need to communicate, even if it's bad news. I tell you what, it's much better in a marriage to be on the same page about bad financial news than it is to just leave her in the dark that you're spiraling out of control. At least then you might be able to come to a solution together. And your marriage is much more important than any financial difficulties you're ever going to have. Again, financial difficulties are temporary. Your marriage is going to ostensibly last for the rest of your life. So finances are a big deal. I mean, obviously, if you've got some debt, then you need to be focused on getting rid of that. One, because it's just healthier for your marriage, but financial difficulties are going to distract from your homeschooling.
Mm-hmm.
If you're stressing out about things that shouldn't even be, you shouldn't be having trouble with your finances. You should be responsible with your money. If you're stressing out about it, that energy could have been put toward homeschooling. It could have been put toward other areas in your marriage. It could have, the financial burden could have gone to you and your family taking a vacation. You have no idea of the lost opportunities because you don't have your financial house in order.
Yeah, I've often gone to God in prayer and have asked for specific things that I needed, and God has provided. Sometimes another homeschool mom will give me the curriculum for free, or I find it at a yard sale of all things. Like some homeschoolers have a yard sale, and there's a whole ton of stuff that's just 50 cents, and I get a whole bunch like that. And so for a lot of years, God provided for us through just inexpensive means like that. And so the finances thing doesn't need to be a strain on your marriage, especially if you're trusting God and you're being frugal. You can commit that to God, and in due time you will eventually get out of debt. But that can be a strain on a marriage because of homeschooling, because there's only one breadwinner. Now, another thing that we talked about was that, give me his heart. Okay, so that's where is your husband going? You married him because he was going in the direction you wanted to go. And so as a wife, if you ask God to give you his heart, then you will have more oneness in your marriage. And as far as homeschooling and everything, just kind of flows out of that. Did you say anything more than that? I don't know. You just said that. I don't know how it was connected to anything that we were talking about, but I thought that was a good point.
I don't remember either.
That you made. Okay, another thing is that a lot of homeschool moms will micromanage every moment of their children's lives, and they exhaust themselves. And so the fatigue is another issue that affects marriage for homeschoolers. How do we overcome that fatigue? Well, one of the things is to make sure you're not doing anything that God does not want you to be doing. I addressed this in my previous webinar last month on the Homeschool channel. It was about prayer, organizing your homeschool through prayer. Yes, it freezes up a little bit, but you could hear the audio, and it was really, it shows you how to get rid of all of the things that don't matter so that you're just doing what God and what your husband would want you to do. And so you shouldn't be so overdoing everything and exhausting yourself. You need to conserve energy, and this is hard for me even now. I mean, it's not necessarily in the area of homeschooling that exhausts me, but my business. And so anything that you are doing that drains your energy, you have to have parameters on it to make sure that you have energy reserved for your husband. And how important is it that a wife isn't completely and utterly fatigued like a worn out rag at the end of the day, every day, day after day, week after week, month after month? Now, every once in a while it will be that way because there's stress every once in a while.
Well, yeah, and if this goes both ways. I mean, for men and women, but again, I know that the primary audience here is women. But if you are just tired and worn out and dragging your feet every time your husband sees you, that's going to rub off on him. It's going to make him tired, right? In other words, if he comes home from work and you're like, hey, I'm glad to see you, big smile, that kind of thing, that's probably going to lighten his spirit some. If you come home, the first thing out of your mouth is, oh, I'm so glad you're here, I'm going to go lay down, I'm so tired. And he's like, oh, well, I'm not done with work, I got to take care of the kids until they go to bed or whatever. And yeah, I love my kids. Okay, I love taking care of my kids. I love spending time with my kids. But I know that a lot of men are, they're worn out by their kids, and they feel like they got to go do this thing. And I'm not saying that what my wife does all day is something that I would want to do. I don't want to do that. I consider my work to be kind of mentally straining and